going to talk about getting an early start in a spring garden. After looking at seed catalogs all winter long, we get so anxious to plant, but we don't want to work our soil when it's too wet, because this will cause problems later on. We'll have clods and things like that. So we're going to talk about maybe some things we can do in the fall to get ready for the spring. There are a few crops that we actually plant in the fall to get an early start in the spring, and one of them is garlic. We're here at Bell's Bend Garden with Eric Wooldridge looking at a beautiful crop of garlic. Eric, when did you get that in the ground?
The planting for our garlic crop usually starts in the spring of the year we're going to plant it. So this particular crop, we had pumpkins preceding it. The pumpkins were planted in May. That gave them enough time to harvest by September. And in September, they were harvested from the field, and we started prepping the field for the garlic crop. So the first thing we did was went in, mowed the pumpkins after they were all pulled out of the field. We then lightly tilled the soil. I think we used a disc in this case to not get a ton of disturbance, but just a little bit. We then went in with the manure spreader and spread about a ton and a half of compost per garlic bed, and then put the garlic seed in and mulched with about a foot of hay or so. And then in the spring, you usually have to go in, almost always, when it's at about this stage, when the weeds haven't quite taken over completely, and go ahead and pull them out, and then your garlic crop's set to head up nicely.
Yeah. We also plant spinach at the time we plant garlic, and it overwinters with just a few leaves. It's only about this big. But then in the spring, it grows and we have spinach to eat in March and April, whereas if I wait and plant the spinach seed in the early spring, it seems like I get to pick it once or twice and it bolts. When we grow kale in the fall and then let it overwinter, in early spring it shoots up these really tasty broccoli looking like things. We call them broccoli or rapini, and they're very tender and are a delicious treat after a winter time of waiting for spring to come. Another way to get an early start on the spring garden is by using what we used to call tobacco plant bed cover. This is Rime, and it's a polyspun fabric that gives us season extension. We use it a lot in the fall to cover up plants for frost protection, but we can also put it on our ground in the spring, and it will warm up the soil and allow us to get that head start in the spring. So what is this here?
In this first bed, we've got Lacinato Kale, and there's probably 6 varieties of kale in here. If you look into the second bed, we've got cabbages, and then there's a third bed which we can't see that has arugula and bok choy and hackeri turnips, and so these are all things that like to have a little warmth early in the season, but also are pretty susceptible to insect pests.
Another benefit of using the Rime in the spring is it softens the blow of raindrops and prevents the sun baking that crust that makes it hard for our little seedlings to emerge. Cover crops are a great way to build soil, add organic matter, and their roots really help to structure the soil. There's nobody that loves cover crops more than I do, and I'm very impressed with this cover crop. Here we have rye and we have vetch. Rye is a grain, vetch is a legume, and we also have some beautiful crimson clover here. But when we want to get an early start in the spring, there's no sense in planting a cover crop. Most of the cover crop's growth happens in the spring when we want that soil to be drying out, not growing stuff and keeping the sun from getting to the soil. So when we grow a cover crop, we're using it to build the soil and to plant in May or June. This garden spot is much more prepared for getting an early start on the spring garden.
Well, this spot, we had summer crops that went late until the first frost. So we had tomatoes and okra, things like that, that we knew we would be harvesting up until October 15th or whenever our frost would come. Once those crops came out of the garden, we rough plowed the garden. So you can do this with whatever implement you have. If you're at home, just using a broad fork to turn the soil.
Or a shovel.
Or a shovel, something to just leave the soil rough so you have maximum surface area and there aren't a lot of weeds on the surface. And what that does is it allows the soil to dry out a lot quicker in the early spring so you can get in and get that early stuff planted.
Another advantage to fall plowing and leaving the soil in big chunks is that they soak up rain, and then when it freezes, the water inside those chunks expands, and then it thaws and expands and thaws and expands as the winter freezes and thaws. So then this has a pulverizing effect and can really create good soil structure like no amount of tillage can do.
If you can manage to plan ahead, composting manure and adding that to the garden in the fall before plowing it and leaving it rough is also another great way to get the soil to mellow out over the winter and be ready to plant in the spring.
Another trick that home gardeners can use that us farmers don't use very much is just to cover your beds with a thick layer of hay mulch. Then in the spring, you pull that off and let the sun hit that ground and dry it out. This way you don't have that covering of winter weeds that is always going to fill up a bare garden spot. When it's too wet to plant in the garden in March, we can go to our coal frames that have been covered with window sashes and open them up and work our drier ground and start lettuce seedlings there so that we can transplant out in the garden when the weather does finally fair up. For home gardeners, I also recommend putting sand in their garden beds. Sand really helps with drainage, which again helps us get our crops out earlier in the spring. Eric, what excites you this year about your gardening?
Well, after getting 6 inches of rain, I'd say the garden drying up so I can get caught up planting, but whenever I hope for that, it turns into a drought all summer. So I don't know, I think the melons this year, we grew a lot of heirloom melons last year, and I'm really looking forward to growing a big crop of them. We have a big heirloom melon festival in August, and they're delicious.
Planning ahead helps in planting our beds a little bit early. Do all we can to get your garden ready for spring by fall preparation.